Greetings everyone, welcome to the Outerview where reason comes first. My name is Professor Les Henry, and today is an absolute joy and a privilege to welcome my sister, my colleague, Dr. Joy White. Dr. Joy, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Les. How are you?
I'm blessed, man, I'm blessed.
Yeah.
Joy, Sister Joy, tell us a bit about Dr. Joy.
Well, by way of introduction, I suppose, I'm Dr. Joy White. I'm a lecturer in applied social studies at the University of Bedfordshire and have been for the last 6-8 months or so.
Okay. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about you, what you do?
Well, I teach health and social care. I teach on the health and social care degree. So that's quite interesting. My professional background for the last 20 years or so has been in the health and social care sector.
Okay.
So I'm in this really interesting position where I write and research about music and Black British contemporary music and kind of youth issues and urban marginality, and I teach health and social care. So they kind of come together in a way because I'm doing both things, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say that seems like a bit of an interesting mix, looking at youth culture through music and health and social care, because I suppose they, you know, we can see the links. Well, I can see the links because I've witnessed your stuff, you know, over I don't know how many years. But it's a very interesting thing because I don't think people would normally put those two together. They don't really seem to be a fit.
Yeah, and I think for me, where it comes together is when you think about social media, how social media is used in terms of how people form their identities, what they put out in the world. All of those things have an impact on young people's well-being, particularly those who have grown up in the age of the internet. I didn't, by the way, I'm kind of pre-internet, but to try and observe a world where mostly all young people have known is this kind of online life as well, and the impact that has on health and well-being, as well as the opportunities it gives you to kind of create new worlds for yourself as well. So it's looking at those things, also looking at how people, or thinking about how young people can connect and form connections over online in much more easily, and there are benefits to that in terms of health and well-being, but downsides as well. So yeah, you wouldn't immediately put those two things together, but I'm thinking about how those things work and how to how to look into those things in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, well, I know we can develop that as we go on, but so one of the things I wanted to reason with you about today is, you know, your thoughts on being a mature learner. Because, you know, most people know what happened to me. I say it all the time, you know, booted out of school at 15, college 16, no qualifications of note. My twin brother, it wasn't the same. So therefore, I have to own that. It was nothing to do with my parents or whatever it is. But yeah, my journey was, I think I was mid-30s when I returned or something like that. So yeah, so your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think, what I would say is I'm also a late life academic, very late life academic. And I left school when I was 16. But most people did in those times. And I wasn't invited to join sixth form, although I could have been, because I did get some O levels. Now everybody knows how old I am. But I did get enough to get into the sixth form, but I wasn't invited to join. And anyway, even if I had been, the circumstances were that, you know, you needed to go and get a job. So before getting my first official job in the civil service, I worked in a sausage factory on a production line. So that was my job. Yeah, the hat, the apron, standing at the end, folding them into shape. I didn't do very well. But since then, I worked in a number of places, but all of my further education, higher education, has all been part-time and all as a mature student. So I was quite mature when I did some A-levels at an evening class, and then did a degree, much later on. And then I had this long gap between doing an MA, finishing an MA, and finishing my PhD, probably 16 or 17 years gap.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, a big gap. So I was out of this, or not even in this arena, really, for a very, very long time. And when I did decide to do a PhD, it was because I was interested. I was just really interested in doing something with what I was starting to observe around me. And it was purely out of interest. It wasn't with a view to being in a university space afterwards. I didn't even know how those rules worked. I was self-funded and so on. But I'm glad I did something that I was interested in, because when you hit those dips in the middle and at the end and at the beginning, what sustains you is having an interest and passion in what you're doing. And that's what kept me going. And I did have some dips. Yeah.
Listen, absolutely. And you know, the funny thing is, what you said really reflects and mirrors my own journey in many ways, except, you know, I didn't do A levels or anything. I did an access 93 to 94. Then I did my degree 94 to 97. Then I did my PhD. Should have started 97, but started proper 98. You know, that's another piece of drama out there. But what you said is, I was interested in speaking about how us as peoples of African ancestry, the diaspora, the Caribbean, Black community, whatever in the UK, how do we sustain ourselves? And where are those arenas? Where are those alternative arenas where we educate ourselves, knowing the system that we're in? And as you say, when we hit those highs and lows, those are the things that sustain us. And again, I never intended to teach in academia. And in fact, it was when I was catching hell at Goldsmiths in 2005, and I was chatting to my brethren, who was like, he's my best friend. I met him, I'm about 11 years older than him. So he was like my little brother that I didn't have when I met him at Goldsmiths in 1994, when we started our degrees. And I said to him, you know, one day, God, these people are giving me so much stress in there. You know, he said to me, but you said you was going to teach in there. You never said you wanted to teach in there, which is why I took 9 years out. And then I've just returned. Well, I've been back 6 years now. But I took 9 years out and I was happy as Larry doing what I wanted to do. I was actually doing what Les wanted to do. And that was do stuff in the community, do my own little research projects. You know, I've never been a money chaser. As long as I'm happy and my family are all right, I'm good. Because, you know, so for me, it's really interesting how we have these parallel journeys. But the other thing that I admire, which I didn't know before, is that you funded everything and did everything part-time. That is I don't think people really appreciate what an achievement that is. Because I was fully funded for my PhD and it was still hard like hell. So I can just imagine, I can just imagine how hard it is to do it part-time. But
and it's
sorry, carry on, sis.
No, I mean it's interesting as well, because I think that sometimes people look and what they see is the end result, or the certificate, but behind the certificate there are you know a multitude of stories and reasons and motives for why people do the things they do and the way that they do and the journey that they take to get there. And I'm always really keen to say that this kind of long and meandering journey that I took is not that unusual. And so, because I think sometimes as well for the younger people that I come into contact with, there's this thing about you've got to do it all now. And if you haven't done it by a certain age, it doesn't count or you'll never get there. But I just think it's really important to say those things. Look at me at my big age, and it took me a long time and a very kind of circuitous route, but I did it. So
and you're absolutely right, because there is too much of that instant gratification, and because of the society that we're in, that instant fix society, a lot of people don't want to make plans. They don't want to set goals and say, you know, I can achieve this. And the thing is with me, I think, you know, like yourself, we can see where we want to go. And so how we get there, it may be precarious, it may be easy at points, but because you can actually see, you've got the goal, you just need to map and track those stages. You know, some of the educational interventionist work that I do around my goal models program, this is what I say to young people, you know, if you want to be, I don't know, a plumber, because that's one of the things that I can do as well. I can tell you how to do it, but you're not going to be a decent plumber in 6 months or a year or even 4 years. You'll learn the basics, but it's when you're on the job doing it all the time, you build up that skill, and then you will call yourself a decent tradesman. Or it's just like with academia, you know, because of how we are as Black academics, and we know about the misrepresentation, the fact we're usually on precarious, hourly paid contracts and blah, blah, blah. That's why one of the jarring things for me is you will have people like ourselves who know what we're doing. We overstand the system of academia, but you'll get some new white academic just qualified, boom, they're ahead of you already. And I've spoken about that with, in fact, I've written about it in a publication that should be coming out a little bit later this year. And for me, these are the kind of jarring things. So I totally agree with you when you say, you know, don't get blinded by the light of the certificate. Find out what the journey was to get to it, because for us, it ain't easy over here.
No, it certainly isn't. And I think, yeah, it's just important to say those things out loud, especially in the times that we're in. To give encouragement and tell the truth, you know, but be encouraging and supportive. Young people have enough on their plate and enough weighing them down without this kind of, you know, this sort of myth making of, you know, I got on this road, I worked hard, stuck at it, there you go, it was done. You know, we need to talk about those slips, those slides, the things that kind of got in our way, the systemic issues that make it very challenging and difficult for us, but we still got there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's a warts and all story. And in fact, on that, it kind of leads me into something I wanted to discuss with you, because we're, in some ways, we're exemplars of this intergenerational thing, because we've got that foundation that we came from that made us realize we could do that. Because it's interesting you said you started off in a sausage factory, because one of the things my teachers always used to say to me was, Henry, you're too thick to do a thinking man's job. You'll end up in a peak freen biscuit factory or on a building site. And you know, it's really interesting when I say to people that a lot of us were educated into exclusion. It's that Paul Willis working class jobs for working class kids, learning to labour. Paul Willis, wonderful work on that. And that is exactly what it was. And I think people don't really realise, you know, you can have your aspirations, but when they are constantly being crushed, and it's not like now where we've got all this wonderful social media where people can share their accounts, or all this research has been done. You know, we're pre that research. That's what we are. Our experiences are what oftentimes that research was based on. So as I said, I find it really funny that it's a pity you can't find the person who encouraged you to go to the sausage factory. Because I always say, I wish I could have conversations with some of my old school teachers from Samuel Pepys. You know, I would love to have some conversations with some of them, because they'd probably have a heart attack, the ones who were telling me, you know, you're too thick to do a thinking man's job. And they probably can't even read what we write.
I know. It's incredible, really. And then, you know, what you were saying about, you know, us or our generation being these kind of walking history books, if you like. And one of the things that I really like about the work that I've been able to do is being able to have those intergenerational conversations through music. So I write about grime mainly, so Black British contemporary music, but mainly grime. That's been my research area. That's not the musical era that I grew up in, though. I grew up with sound systems, grew up with reggae, I grew up with dancehall. That's my musical background.
Yeah.
But I came to grime via the young people that I met, because that's what they were listening to, and came to understand how important it was and how significant it was, and could hear especially in some of the early work that young people were making, I could hear those kind of reggae and dancehall influences.
Oh, absolutely.
And
yeah.
and could see in the performance the clash, the rhyming over the beat, the spitting of all of that. I could see and hear what I'd grown up with, but in a different form, taken into the present day, layered with all of those local sensibilities that then took on this kind of international taste, or took on an international audience. And so with that kind of musical history, that's a starting point to be able to tell a Black British history with all of our experiences, because we can talk about how reggae clubs were policed, and we can see the parallels with how grime and drill are policed and surveilled today. And all of those things, and it also, I think, offers a way to talk about some quite difficult times, some quite terrible times, in terms of, police brutality, all of those things that are quite painful and difficult to talk about, the kind of everyday racism that I grew up with as a young person, as a teenager, as somebody going into work as well, going into these very traditional white spaces as a young person, as a 17-year-old or 16-year-old starting work in these places, and trying to keep some sense of self and well-being and wholeness in these quite negative spaces as well. Hostile.
Absolutely.
That's the word I'm looking for. Hostile. And so the hostile environment that we talk about now is not just from now, it's existed for decades. And then if we wanted to go back even further, but what music does, I think, is allow us to start a conversation about some of these things that are quite difficult to talk about, but it's important we do.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why, we give thanks that you decided to contribute to, the book that myself and Prof Matt Worley from Reading are putting out, resisting, I keep calling it Resisting the System. No one would believe I came up with a title, but whatever it is, I don't know, narratives from across the UK reggae baseline. It's actually going to be published in December this year. Touch wood.
Yeah.
But
nice.
And as I was saying, it's one of the reasons why we wanted someone like yourself to contribute, because I've seen your presentations and the wonderful way you can weave those intergenerational narratives together. So it doesn't matter what age the audience is, they will get an idea of, oh yeah, so this is how this links to this. Because it's funny, I was laughing with my granddaughter the other day, was 16 the other day. I said to her, isn't it interesting that as old people, whatever you young people listen to is rubbish? Now I understand my dad.
Yeah.
I kind of want to nothing's not make up there, so it don't make no sense. And it's like, so
yeah.
And that's what I said to them. But the funny thing is, when you start to actually reason with them and they explain to you what they're doing, what they're listening to, and how, once you can get past, my father used to call it cobell, which I think is cowbell, holy panoi, wahala. Once you get past that, and you start to actually think, boy, it's like Amiri Baraka, Leroy Jones, The Changing Same. It really is the same. The sentiments are the same. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because the world hasn't moved that quickly.
Yeah.
Maybe technologization has around us and in our environment, but the actual sensibilities, especially the social, cultural, political, whatever it is, they haven't shifted that much. Because I know, you know, I read your chapter, and when you look at it and you see some of the things that the young people are suggesting, you just think, put this on reggae, put this on hip hop, put this on whatever. It's exactly the same. The sentiments are the same. So yeah, you know, I think it is really good that you use your, you know, your research and your healthcare background to bridge that so-called divide, because oftentimes it's a false divide.
Yeah.
It's a false divide.
Yeah, and that's and it is, as you say, it is really important. We don't always have to, even if we don't have an ear for the work, even if we don't appreciate the sound, we don't have to like it, you know. But what we do have to do is recognize how significant, socially, culturally, economic, all the things that you said, how significant it is, how much it matters, not just for the young people that are making it, but how much it matters on the whole. And when people try and dismiss the work, the sonic work that these young people do, what are you really saying? That it has no value and they have?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
we're not going there, you know. And I've heard that argument. I've been in places where that argument's been made. What is this? I've heard, and I always not defend it, because the work doesn't need defending, because the work speaks for itself. But we have to come back to that point that this work is important, this work has value, and this is why it matters, and just kind of laying it all out there. And then that's on you. If you then choose to dismiss something that's so valuable, that's on you.
Yeah. And you see, the beautiful thing about that is, and this is one of the things that I will always say, and I state it unequivocally, we are best placed to judge the merits and demerits of the cultural forms we produce. We are best placed. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to write about sound system culture. From inside, from Box Boy with Shaka in 1971 to DJing in 1982, you know, Saxon Ghetto Tone, Frontline, Diamonds. You know, for me, one of the highlights of my life was DJing on sound system.
Oh, wow,
and probably one of the highest points of my life was DJing on Frontline sound system, which, no disrespect to Saxon, but to me, Frontline was the crispest and heaviest sound I ever chatted on. And then imagine go to Jamaica and DJing on Metro Media with Peter Metro, full crew at Standpipe Barbican. You know, I only heard about these. I DJed with people like Johnny Ringo, Welton Irie, when I was on Frontline, and we clashed with Gemini in People's Club, or whatever the hell it was then, Praed Street, Paddington. We clashed in there with Gemini. I met Welton Irie, Johnny Ringo, all these people. And that was me and Mikey General, when he used to be Singer Man General. And we used to head up Frontline sound. So what I'm saying is, I knew I was best placed to actually speak to what the culture represents. And that's what we have to do. And that's why if I meet, you know, young people who are into grime or stuff like that, and they wanted to know about it, like my reading lists feature yourself and Dr. Monique Charles. I put both of you on there because I want my students to know, because they're the grime people. 18, 19, up to 20, whatever it is. One of them the other day was telling me about something called mumble rap. I don't even know what that is. Miss I don't know, that can't make no sense to me. But they say, I said, what's it sound like? Miss said, no, sir. But at the end of the day, I suppose someone will come along one day and make sense of it. But the point is, we are best placed, whether we are the producers of it, or the interlocutors, or whatever it is, but we are best placed, and I will always argue that. And the proof is in the pudding, because I think one of the things that you said for me that really hits the nail on the head, if you're saying the music has no value, then you're saying the people who create the music, that cultural artifact, also have no value. If you have no value, you've got nothing to offer. And
that argument has been made in various guises about many forms of Black creative expression.
Absolutely.
we're not doing that anymore. We're not allowing that argument to just go out into the world unchallenged, and yeah, unchallenged, because we know different, and that's why we do the research that we do. That's why we write what we write, because it does have value. It's not about, you know, proving it. We're just laying it out there. Here it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, here it is.
And you
And
know,
I think, yeah, I was just
no,
about to
carry on,
say,
carry on.
when you were talking about your DJ, when I was about to start writing up some of my PhD, and you know what it is, all the supervision in the world, I didn't know where to start. And I'm looking at other people's and I'm thinking, wow, I don't even know how I'm even going to get to start some of these words. And then I found yours
Oh,
with the
really?
DJs.
Oh, wow.
But I read it, and even though it was about music, but not about the areas that I was looking at, I read it, and it was accessible. I understood it.
Yeah.
I understood it. I understood what you were doing, and writing it in that particular way, the A side and the B side. And I thought, now I understand. Now I understand that this is my work to make of it what I will in the way that I want to, because
Yeah.
you've done it. So yeah, thanks.
Well, you know, sis, I give thanks, and guess what happened to me? My brethren, guy called Dr. Kimani Nahusi, invited me to a book launch in 1999, and the book was called something like A Comeback Home. And at the book launch, it was somewhere in London. There was Kimani Nahusi, a guy called Professor Ian Isidore Smart, who created a discipline called Hispanophone Studies. So he looks at, he's from Trinidad, and he looks at the Spanish speaking contribution to African-centered thought and action. So he created this discipline. To my knowledge, he's the person who created it. But also, Chalk Dust, the Calypsonian, was there. Now, I never knew that he was Professor Hollis Liverpool III, who writes about Calypso and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, he was there at this launch for this book, and he did this talk, and I'm sure it was when and I think he had copies of his book as well, and his book was called Rituals of Power and Rebellion, and he's looking at like Kaiso from the 1800s up to the 1990s or whatever. But interestingly enough, he traces aspects of it right back to ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, and ancient Africa. So some of the clashing and all that kind of stuff. But guess what happened? Chalk Dust does this talk, and then he starts telling people about his biography, and I'm like, because I've heard of Chalk Dust, the Calypsonian, but if you asked me to tell you some of his records, I couldn't. But if I heard them, I might say, yeah, I like that. But anyway, he said one thing during his talk, and I actually got him to write it in my book. And it's actually in my thesis, and it's in my DJ book. He was talking and he said, when he was studying at uni, sociology, he was also kind of doing his Calypso thing in the night. So he said sometimes he would be performing all night, and then he would go into uni and drop asleep, or he'd have dropsy. And he said one day the teacher said to him, it was either school or uni, one of them, but he was studying sociology, and the teacher said to him, Hollis, you will fail this if you can't pay attention and stay awake. He said to her, I can't fail this because I sing sociology. That's when all the lights went on for me. All the lights went on. And I thought, of course I can do this, because this is what we do. This is exactly what we do. We are walking, Lesbach always says it, we are walking repositories of sociology. What it is that certain caste and class don't want us to appreciate that. But we are, that's what we do. So whatever we do must have some kind of sociological value, because we live in a society. So to me, you know, I give thanks for what you said about the writing, because one of the things I tried to do in my writing is make it accessible. Because to me, if we can't make it accessible, then are we writing for other academics? And if we're writing for other academics, are we writing for an audience who doesn't really reflect what we're bringing to the table? And that's why I self-publish my books. I say it all the time. I offer it to academic publishers. If they want it, they want it. If they don't, I put it out myself, because I know it has value, because it represents the community I'm coming from. There was a very interesting conversation the other day, an online conversation about, you know, decolonizing curriculum and blah, blah, blah. And they had a publisher there, white woman, white publisher from a reputable publishing house. And she was basically saying, well, yes, you know, because we can diversify and we can do this and we can do that. And I was going to comment, but I didn't bother, because I was going to say, I wonder if you really appreciate how many authors you've probably destroyed their careers, Black authors, by rejecting their work. Because the fact that this late in the day you're saying you recognize, because of all the Black Lives Matter, killing of George Floyd, tearing down statues, all of a sudden now you realize that there are alternatives out there. That's what scares me, because it's like my Whiteness Made Simple book. I got into a Twitter thing about it. You probably saw it, because I know we all did the tweet. But
Yes.
I put out there, whilst I've been told I am the first Black UK-based academic to solely author a book on whiteness, I know I'm not the first one to approach anyone with it. Mainstream publishers. The difference was when I approached two of them with it and they said no, I put it out myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing about what we do, and why, you know, we have to, especially now, it's too late in the day to pander to anyone to accept what we do. Because as you say, what I love what you keep saying, you're not there to prove anything to anyone. That's not what we do. What we do is we throw it out there, and if you think it stands up to your standards of academic rigor and scrutiny, then you should judge it on its merits. If you can't, why should I care what you think about my work?
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of being a late like academic.
But the thing is, you're in there and you've got something to value. I mean, what is it you've put out? What, your second book now, is it? Second.
The second book came out in May. Came out mid-pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is, you write your articles, you produce your articles, you do your outreach stuff. In fact, we do more outreach than most academics do.
But it's a good point that you raise about language and how it's used, and if you're doing research and it's about people's lives, not representing or presenting people as if they're some kind of out there species. No, do you know what I mean? And using words very carefully so that you're not just kind of. It's quite hard to put into words, but I know what I mean, because I've read and heard the things that I'm trying to describe, particularly when it comes to do with young Black lives and young Black people. Yeah. That this kind of out there object. You know. Yeah. And what we're forgetting is that we're talking about young Black people living in particular times, specific circumstances, with a range of systemic issues that go along, and we need to talk about that in the right way. There isn't only one right way, but we need to talk about it in the right way. Yeah, not absolutely. You see it in the kind of in the gang discourse, for example. I don't write about gangs, and I don't write about drugs. And when I was writing up my PhD work, and when I first started presenting my PhD work, one of the questions that I always got in the beginning was, oh, you know, you're writing about Black music, or young people and young Black people and music. Oh, what about the drugs? What about the crime? What about the gangs? There's a bigger conversation. There's a bigger amount. It's much more complex and intricate and layered than these little tick boxes. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely. So it's not that I'm not aware, it's that I choose to look at the wider, the deeper things that are going on, which is part of the reasons why I wrote Terraformed, which was to start to think about
So
some of those things.
That's your new book, isn't it? Your new book is called, because I was actually supposed to do the launch with you.
Yeah, yeah,
Paul Gilroy and
yeah,
Gilroy.
yeah, because that was it. We were all set. We were all set to do the live launch. Remember those?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It couldn't happen. It couldn't happen yet. But let's see.
But it'll happen. It'll happen.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You know, hopefully, when we get to the other side, whatever the other side is, that we'll have that opportunity.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to kind of just place some of these conversations, some of the things that I was seeing, some of the things that I was, experiencing, living in London, living in the same place or the same area for a number of years, watching how that area changed, seeing the effect that had on young Black communities in particular, and wanting to just kind of make some sense for it, for me and for them, because trying to work out what was going on, but not in this way where it was, that's happening out there, that's what's going on for them. It's difficult because, and then have the usual statistics. So the book is quite strange in in a number of ways. People say
not just
to me,
the title of Terraformed, because that's one of the reasons why I said, I want to have a read of this. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it is a kind of, because I want people to read it and find out what it's about. It's a short book. It is very sociological, but it's written, I hope, in everyday, accessible language.
It will, because I've seen your writing. As I said, the chapter that you've written for us. So I will definitely tell people that the book will speak to them. And the things about what you do, you write in a very accessible way, but it's an academic way, because we're scholars.
Yeah.
That's what we are. These are scholastic pieces. If they want us to write something on Twitter, then go and read Twitter. But, what we write it's informed, it's rigorous, it stands on its own 2 feet. And there may be words, concepts that you don't necessarily grasp immediately, but that's part of the joy of reading, because you've been challenged. For me.
It is. It is part of the joy of reading. And I'm glad that you said that, because it is that thing about, the pleasure in finding new words, new meanings, looking things up, using it in your own vocabulary as well.
Yeah.
And, hearing those words back from somebody else and thinking, oh, actually, I know what that means. These seem like small things, but they're not. They're not. And it was a book that was, as we were discussing earlier about revisiting some of those quite painful times growing up, it was a challenge to write in many ways, and some parts of it very difficult. There's one chapter that I wrote, and I haven't read it since, because it is quite tough. But the feedback that I've got, especially the feedback that I've got from young people that have read it, is the kind of the understanding of how systems, structures, and institutions work in a way that means that they now understand that it's not that their individual efforts aren't enough. There are systems and institutions and practices that make it difficult for them. And that makes me, I'm all right. That's what I wanted to do. If that bit works, I'm all right with it.
And when you can actually convey that to them in a way that is palatable, and they can actually locate themselves in that picture, that's where the learning is. That's where the overstanding is for me. And that, for me, is why, the work that you do, and with young people and in your community, etc., and in the academic arena, which is why I'm glad you are actually where you should be, in academia, where you can really get to challenge, and I don't like the word influence, but I'll use it, those young people into realizing what we have is of worth, and what we have is of value. And how do you know in 50 years' time they're not going to say one of the greatest things that came out of the UK was grime? Who would have thought they would have said that about Lovers Rock?
Yeah.
Who would ever have thought about that? No one would have thought about that. So, you know, to me, we just have to give thanks that we're on the journey and we're on the road that we're on. But I wanted to say, so Sister Joy, God, Dr. White sound awkward, you know, that's why I find it hard for music. I know what that is.
Yeah.
The young
Dr.
people,
Joy,
the young people, whoosh, they got no clue.
Yeah,
that's another thing you could go research. But tell us something surprising about Joy, Dr. Joy. Tell us something.
Okay. All right. Well, we've spoken about music at length. We've spoken about music before. We've spoken about, you know, writing about music and all the rest of it. But what I'm going to say is that back in the day, I was a keen roller skater. Now we're talking about roller disco. Don't look at me like that, Liz. We're talking about roller disco. So I'm just going to drop some roller disco spots from back in the day now. The Starlight Rooms in Hammersmith. The Fridge, once or twice, skating. Battersea Park on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
The Empire in Leicester Square. Where else was there? The Electric Ballroom in Camden. I think it's called something else now. But so, and what they did, especially at the Starlight, was they'd play soul and reggae. So you'd skate and they'd play soul and reggae. And then they, towards the end of the evening, because it always finished early, but they wanted people to just kind of wrap up and go, and no one would go. So they started playing all these big pop tunes, Spandau Ballet and all the rest of it. But people would still skate round to them. So in the end, we'd have soul, reggae, funk, no disco, and all these pop tunes. And because that part of my life was pre-social media, I can tell you that I was excellent at roller disco, Les. I can tell you that. And unless you knew me in those times, no one can dispute it. No one, because there's no evidence. But I went every week for, it felt like years at the time, but probably it was a kind of two year madness. So it to the point where I went on holiday to New York, and we even went skating there in Central Park, the whatever the rink's called there. But yeah, roller skating was a thing. Going on to Hyde Park, going on protests to Brighton, going to Margate with the skates. You know, these are the 4-wheel, not the inline, the 4-wheel.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, all of that. So travelled all over the place skating.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm not really that surprised.
Yeah.
But I go and surprise you, Bauer.
Yeah. Oh.
I used to have a pair of Bauer skates, mate, with street snake wheels.
I wanted those. I couldn't afford them.
Listen, I couldn't really afford them
them
either. I think I picked them starved for about 2 months to buy the wheels. But do you know the funny thing is, I had a pair of Bauer skates, and I put they had the street snake wheels or something like that, and I put them on it. And let me tell you something, I used to skate in like the local parks in Brockley and all that. I used to live in Brockley. And one day, Peter King must have tried to jump a bench and broke the 2M foot.
Oh.
Yeah. And I gave my skates away after that, because when you change, you see people who don't know the skates, so when they meet you next time, they're going to ask you, when you put those speed wheels on, they're like 1.5 times faster. Yeah. And so when I put those wheels on my skates, I had a pair of black Bauer skates, and I put those wheels on them, and let me tell you something. I went over the park and I see like the bench that Peter King tried to jump, and I just did a little swerve around it, and then I gave them away, because I know the kind of person I am. I wouldn't be able to stop myself from trying to jump that thing, although I never had the skills to carry it off. Like obviously he didn't. But yeah, so I'm not really surprised. But you see, I didn't even remember roller skating until you said that. But yeah, we used to do it. It was a thing, man. What one takeaway that you can leave us with?
Okay, so if you do know me, my very annoying trait is that I'm always optimistic. I'm a glass half full person. My daughter finds it very annoying, but that's me. And so the thing that in terms of a takeaway would be for hope for a better world, but not in this kind of Pollyanna wishy-washy. I was reading an essay by Prof Back, and he's talking about a worldly hope, meaning not this sort of optimism that everything's going to be okay, but practical, communal ways of making things better, making the world better. And then I think about the community organisations that I know of that young people have set up that are active, practical, trying and succeeding to change the world that they're in. All of these things are a worldly hope, I think. And I think I found this quote by Audre Lorde, because again, just to kind of put this eternal optimism into some kind of frame. And what she said is, but I do have hope. To face the realities of our lives is not a reason for despair. Despair is a tool of your enemies. And that's
beautiful. Absolutely.
The frame that I keep in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Joy White, Sister Joy, it's been a pleasure. You know, I know we're going to link up soon. We've still got to do your book thing, so I'll be vexed if you get anyone else to do it. You know, because I was so looking forward to that kind of reasoning around your latest book. And yeah, man, stay blessed and we give thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Les. Thank you. I really appreciate it.